Egypt has fallen, but Egypt has risen again. From the ashes of civil war, a new line of kings brings unity, ambition, and empire. They will build hidden fortresses, revive the gods, and push beyond the Nile's edge. The Middle Kingdom, Egypt reborn. Egypt's Middle Kingdom dawned with the reunification of the two lands by Pharaoh Mentuhotep II. Mentuhotep was a Theban king of the 11th dynasty who overcame the rival Heracleopolitan dynasty in the north, ending decades of civil strife, the First Intermediate Period. According to later chronicles, a turning point came in his 14th regnal year when the northern kings desecrated the royal necropolis at Abydos, an outrage that prompted Mentuhotep to march north and decisively defeat them. By his 39th year, he had unified Egypt under a single rule from Nubia to the Delta. Mentuhotep celebrated this achievement by adopting the throne name Sematawi, meaning he who unifies the two lands, signaling that he saw himself as the restorer of order and mart to Egypt. Mentuhotep II's reign of 51 years ushered in a revival of strong centralized kingship. He restored the cult of the ruler, portraying himself as a living god-king, and even donned the regalia of deities, the headdresses of Amun and Min, in his imagery. Determined to re-centralize power after an era of decentralization, he stripped the nomarchs of power and installed new officials loyal to Thebes. Once again, authority flowed from the king alone. As mentioned last episode, Mentuhotep II built his mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri in Thebes. This innovative terraced temple was one of the pharaoh's most ambitious projects, a new style of royal monument. It featured a multi-tiered platform against the western cliffs and a central structure, now collapsed, that likely combined a pyramid base with a pillared hall. Covered walkways and columned terraces led to a sanctuary where Mentuhotep was worshipped as a deity, explicitly identifying the pharaoh with Osiris, god of the afterlife. It directly inspired Hatshepsut's adjacent temple centuries later, and marked the first time a mortuary temple aligned the king so closely with Osiris's death and rebirth mythology. The rise of Osiris's cult during this era reflected a broader religious shift. Common Egyptians began to hope for an afterlife alongside the king, and Osiris, as the divine ruler of the dead, became central to funerary belief. While Egypt was reuniting, Nubia to the south was undergoing its own consolidation. During the First Intermediate Period, Egypt's grasp on Nubia had loosened, allowing indigenous cultures to flourish. By Mentuhotep's time, a powerful Nubian polity was coalescing around the city of Kerma in Upper Nubia. Archaeology shows that well before 2000 BCE, large settled communities had formed at Kerma, marked by fortified towns, extensive cemeteries, and rich agriculture. This would evolve into the earliest kingdom in sub-Saharan Africa. The Egyptians later called this southern kingdom Kush. Unlike Egypt, Kush had no writing in this period. Our knowledge comes from excavations. They built up defenses, trenches, palisades, and thick mud brick walls with bastions. Thus, as Mentuhotep II consolidated Egypt, the kingdom of Kerma was taking shape to the far south, laying the groundwork for a future rival power. For those who don't know, our channel tries to share history from all over the world, but have never done ad reads or spoken to advertisers. All we ask is to subscribe if you enjoy these historical journeys, and if possible, consider becoming a member, and we can finish this project together. Mentuhotep III consolidated his father's national reunification and reopened Red Sea trade routes, while his successor's brief and poorly attested reign served as the pivot, as power passed to a new royal line, the 12th. Its founding pharaoh was Amenemhat I, Mentuhotep's vizier, who likely seized the throne in a coup. Amenemhat continued and intensified the policies of centralization. Around his 20th regnal year, he moved the royal residence from Thebes to a new capital he founded near the Fayum oasis. This capital was called Ichtawe, meaning Caesar of the two lands, symbolically placed near the boundary of Upper and Lower Egypt to cement control over both. Establishing Ichtawe marked the first time since the Old Kingdom that Egypt had a single purpose-built royal capital in a new location. Alongside this, Amenemhat inaugurated a new royal practice, that of co-regency. He appointed his son, Senusret I, as junior co-ruler. This innovation ensured smoother succession and political stability. It came in handy as tragedy struck. A classic Middle Kingdom text, the Instruction of Amenemhat, tells the tale of how the king lost his life, coming back as a spirit to counsel his son. It was after supper, when night had fallen, and I had spent an hour of happiness. I was asleep upon my bed, having become weary, and my heart had begun to follow sleep. When weapons of my counsel were wielded, I had become like a snake of the necropolis. As I came to, I awoke to fighting, and found that it was an attack of the bodyguard. After being assassinated by his trusted guards, Amenemhat advised his son, "Trust no one," and continued describing the conspiracy that killed him. This wisdom text, likely composed at Senusret's behest, both warned future kings of palace intrigue and legitimized Senusret's own rule. Under Senusret, the centralized state grew stronger and more affluent. The new capital, Ichtawe, thrived as an administrative hub, while the king placed loyalists in top positions and continued to curb the autonomy of regional nomarchs. Many long-powerful provincial dynasties saw their influence wane as the court asserted direct oversight. Egypt expanded its mining and quarrying projects once again, sending expeditions to the Sinai for turquoise and copper, and to the Eastern Desert for gold. Senusret also began an impressive building program. He built his own pyramid complex at El-Lisht, near Ichtawe, and decorated temples across Egypt. He erected obelisks at Heliopolis and built a shrine to Amun at Karnak in Thebes, its cult center. This signaled the rise of Amun as a state deity, as this once local Theban god gained national prominence. The very name Amenemhat means Amun is at the forefront. The 12th dynasty pharaohs, while amplifying the cult of Amun, never lost sight of Osiris, whose cult became universal in Egypt. The first fully attested Osiris myth was dated to the Middle Kingdom. According to the legend, Osiris was originally the first god-king of Egypt. But he has a jealous brother, Seth. Seth tricks Osiris to lay in a coffin, which is then locked and thrown into the Nile. Osiris's corpse is recovered by his sister wife Isis, but Seth finds them and hacks the body into 14 pieces, scattering them across the world. Seth then claims the throne for himself. But Isis and her twin sister Nephthys gather the king's scattered limbs. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, then steps in, anointing the corpse with sacred oils, stuffing it with resins, and binding it tightly in linen bandages. In so doing, Osiris becomes the prototype for the Egyptian mummy. In later narratives, he is still missing one piece of his body. His phallus was not recovered, as it was eaten by a fish, so Isis creates one out of wax or gold, and uses her wings to temporarily revive the king. This allows for Isis and Osiris to conceive a child before he leaves this realm, the god who would become Horus. As Osiris's body was whole once more, he was given second life as ruler of Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Horus grows up and eventually wins the throne back from Seth. This story linked every current Egyptian king with the god Horus, and originally every dead king with Osiris, but common folk began identifying with Osiris during the tumultuous intermediate period. The Middle Kingdom also witnessed a flowering of literature and culture. Masterpieces of Egyptian literature were composed and circulated widely in this period, indicating a high level of literary sophistication among the elite. Apart from the aforementioned instructions of Amenemhat, One such work is The Tale of Senusret, an adventure story set just after Amenemhat's death in the early 12th dynasty. It recounts how Senusret, an official, flees Egypt in panic upon learning of the king's assassination, deserting the army in the process. He lives a life in exile in Canaan, meeting the kingdom's ruler and starting a family. After emerging victorious in a rivalry, Senusret returns home in his old age and is pardoned by King Senusret, the very man who led the army he deserted years earlier. The lesson? Senusret yearns for his homeland and finds that Egypt's king, the good god, is merciful and all-powerful, able to restore order and forgive. The oldest copy of the text dates to the later Middle Kingdom, around 1800 BCE, showing how popular it was within a few generations. These and other texts like Prophecy of Nefertiti, which retrospectively prophesied King Amenemhat, bringing peace after chaos, or The Debate of a Man with His Bow, reflecting existential fears, suggest that Middle Kingdom intellectual life was rich. Scribes copied these compositions for centuries to come, considering them classics. Art and statuary also achieved new heights. While Old Kingdom art idealized pharaohs as eternally youthful, 12th dynasty royal portraits show a brooding realism. Statues of later king Senusret III, with lined faces and downturned mouths, perhaps reflect the burden of rulership or a new artistic introspection. Meanwhile, Egypt's attention turned again to Nubia, bringing the two lands into closer contact and conflict with the land they would call Kush. The resurgent Egyptian state coveted Nubia's rich resources and strategic trade routes. Gold was plentiful in the eastern deserts of Nubia, and exotic products like incense, ebony, leopard skins, and elephant ivory arrived from deeper Africa via Nubian intermediaries. Early in the dynasty, Pharaoh Senusret I led campaigns southward, and Egypt reasserted control over Lower Nubia, or Wawat, the Nile corridor between the first and second cataracts, where the Sea Group Nubians lived. Egyptian records speak of victories over Nubian tribes like the Wawat and Irjet, paving the way for occupation. To secure the territory, Senusret built a massive fortress at Buhen, just below the second cataract, demarcating a new border. Buhen's fortress, commenced during his reign and later expanded, was the first in a chain of fortified posts that would dominate Nubia. For the kingdom of Kerma, based above the third cataract further to the south, these Egyptian incursions were both a threat and an opportunity. Kerma's rulers were likely too distant to directly confront Egypt's early push, so they consolidated their domain in Upper Nubia. Further from the Nile, in the eastern desert, were another group of Nubians whom the Egyptians called Medjay. The Medjay were a Nubian desert tribe, highly mobile desert pastoralists. Some of these Nubians entered Egyptian service as mercenaries and were hired to patrol the eastern desert and serve as bowmen. Yet, despite these good relations, Egypt continued fortifying the border, while Kush was growing just beyond it, biding its time. After Senusret's militaristic reign, Amenemhat II consolidated the empire's growing wealth, with peaceful foreign relations and overseas expeditions. Senusret II also ruled during a time of peace, but shifted focus inward, digging canals in the Fayum and commissioning other domestic projects. The Middle Kingdom reached a peak of centralized power and imperial ambition under Senusret III. Later, Egyptians remembered him as a legendary warrior king, and with good reason. Senusret led multiple military campaigns deep into Nubia, at least 4 major expeditions in his years 8, 10, 16, and 19. He drove further south than any predecessor, determined to subjugate all Nubia up to the second cataract and beyond. In doing so, he drastically reset Egypt's southern boundary. To lock down these gains, Senusret built and enhanced a network of massive river fortresses guarding the Nile corridor. In addition to Buhen, which he strengthened with multiple walls and a moat, he constructed fortresses at Semna and Semna South, on opposite banks to control the Nile's narrow rapids, along with a series of others. These fortresses, spaced at strategic points, were engineering marvels, featuring thick walls up to 5 meters wide, towers and battlements, drawbridges and ditches, and internal complexes with barracks, granaries, armories, and temples. Each fort was garrisoned by Egyptian soldiers, and by the 13th dynasty, entire families lived in these fortress towns, indicating a long-term colonial presence in Nubia. Together, they formed a formidable barrier between Egyptian-held Lower Nubia and the independent Upper Nubia of Kerma. One Semna inscription famously declares that no Nubian shall be allowed to pass going north or south, by land or by boat, except for trade. Senusret III's ideology of kingship was aggressively expansionist and paternalistic. On a boundary stela at Semna, Senusret boasts, "I have made my boundary beyond that of my fathers. I have added to what was bequeathed me. As for any son of mine who maintains this border which my majesty has made, he is my son indeed. The true son is he who champions his father, who guards the border of his begetter." This proclamation admonished future kings to hold the line he had drawn at Semna, effectively defining Egyptian kingship by the defense of Egypt's borders. Senusret not only cowed Egypt's external foes, he also weakened the power of internal rivals. His reign saw the final eclipse of the autonomous nomarchs. The once proud local governors, who had built lavish tombs in the early 12th dynasty, disappear from the record as Senusret centralized authority in his own hands. By curbing feudal elites, the king redirected resources to royal projects, and Egypt experienced a revival in art and craftwork. Senusret III was so revered for his leadership that he was deified in his own lifetime, an extraordinary honor. Senusret built 2 tombs. One was a pyramid at Dashur near his 12th dynasty predecessors, and King Sneferu's pyramids from the Old Kingdom. The other was a hidden tomb at Abydos, making him one of the first pharaohs to revive it as a true burial site since the earliest dynasties. His pyramid at Dashur was his public tomb for the solar and royal cult, close to the capital and the other pyramid sites at Abusia and Giza, to pay homage to the solar theology. But it's more likely Senusret's body was buried in secret at Abydos, the site of the Osiris cult. Later generations conflated Senusret with other great conquerors, even with legends of Sesostris, who legend states led military expeditions into Europe, remembering him as the archetypal strong pharaoh. For Kerma, Senusret III's reign was challenging. His campaigns pushed Egyptian domination to the very doorstep of Kerma's sphere. Egyptian texts refer to the Nubians of this time with scorn. In fact, execration texts, magical curse inscriptions written on clay figures or pots, reveal Egyptian attitudes toward foreign foes. Some execration texts, dating to Senusret's reign, were found at the Nubian fortress of Megissa, and they list Nubian peoples and chiefs as targets of the pharaoh's wrath, alongside certain cities in the Levant. Following Senusret III, his son Amenemhat III presided over what is remembered as a golden age of prosperity. Building on his father's centralized system, Amenemhat exploited Egypt's natural resources to their fullest. Tons of turquoise were extracted from Sinai, amethyst from the eastern desert, and gold from Lower Nubia. In the Fayum Depression, Amenemhat undertook massive irrigation works, building dams and canals to channel Nile floodwaters into Lake Moeris. The project turned swampland into farmland and earned him a reputation as a benefactor who made the two lands prosperous. He also constructed 2 pyramids, one at Dashur, the so-called Black Pyramid, and a final one at Hawara, near the Fayum. The Hawara pyramid complex included a sprawling mortuary temple that classical authors later dubbed the Labyrinth for its bewildering array of halls and corridors. According to Herodotus, this labyrinth surpassed even the pyramids in impressiveness. It was likely a multi-level complex of courts and storerooms, possibly meant to celebrate all the nomes of Egypt united under the king. Amenemhat's long reign, estimated at 45 years, was marked by internal peace, a high level of artistic achievement, as craftsmen produced finely carved scarabs, jewellery and statues, including an exquisite sphinx and realistic statues of bureaucrats and nobles. But while Amenemhat's Egypt was basking in prosperity, a sizable rival power was germinating in the south. By the mid-18th century BCE, the kingdom of Kerma had matured into a formidable state that both interacted with and stood apart from Pharaonic Egypt. Its heart was the city of Kerma, just south of the Third Cataract. There, excavations reveal a large urban centre with distinct districts, industries and monumental buildings. The most famous structures are the defufas, massive mud brick edifices unique to Nubian architecture. In the city's centre stood the Western Defufa, a solid mud brick temple platform, about 50 by 25 metres at the base and soaring 18 metres high. This three-storey monument, with remnants of interior rooms and rooftop altars, was likely the main state temple of Kerma. Its walls once bore plastered and painted scenes, and columns supported its halls. As Kerma entered its classic age, the Western Defufa appears to have been elaborated to resemble an Egyptian temple in layout, with multiple chambers and possibly an inner sanctuary. Yet it was built of earth bricks, not stone, underscoring a different building tradition. The Defufa was probably used for ceremonies and worship, perhaps dedicated to a Nubian creator god or sun deity. Nearby, a palace or audience hall likely existed, as well as residential quarters for the elite. The city was encircled by defensive walls and gates, reflecting the Kerma rulers' need to fortify their capital. Dated to the early Kerma culture, it is the oldest large human-built monument anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Contemporary accounts from Egypt are silent about Kerma's gods, but archaeological evidence suggests rituals involving cattle sacrifice were prominent. In the royal cemetery east of Kerma, kings were laid to rest in huge tumuli, earth mounds, marked by circles of black polished stones. Surrounding these tomb mounds, hundreds of bucrania, cattle skulls, were arranged in neat rows. By the classic Kerma period, this practice had scaled up dramatically. The largest royal tumulus, likely belonging to a king, was over 90 metres wide and surrounded by over 400 cattle skulls, an astounding display of wealth and pastoral power. Within these tombs, archaeologists found human sacrifices as well, retainers who were buried with their king to serve him in the afterlife. Dozens, even hundreds of men, women and sometimes horses or dogs were interred in radiating chambers around the central burial, just as the early Egyptian kings had done. The Kerma kings adopted an impressive royal ideology. As patrons of fertility, formidable warriors, and possibly seen as divine or semi-divine figures mediating with the gods. Craftsmen produced distinctive high-quality pottery, like the classic Kerma beakers with black-topped red polish, so finely made that they resemble eggshells. They worked ivory, wood and metal into furniture and regalia. Gold was abundant, and the kings of Kush undoubtedly controlled the rich Nubian goldfields like those of Wadi al-Laki and the Blue Nile. Egypt's proud Middle Kingdom did not last forever. By the mid-1600s BCE, many of the Egyptian forts show levels of destruction or Nubian occupation. At Buhen, a stele was discovered honouring a Nubian official named Nedje, who titled himself Governor of Buhen, suggesting that local Nubian rulers took charge in Lower Nubia, a dramatic reversal. The mighty fortresses that Senusret once built were now in Kushite hands. But how? After Amenemhat III's long reign, the 12th dynasty waned. His successor, Amenemhat IV, was relatively ineffectual and died without a male heir. The throne passed briefly to Queen Sobekneferu, Egypt's first attested female pharaoh. Though competent, her short reign ended the dynasty, and without a clear successor, Egypt's central authority fragmented. What followed was the 13th dynasty, a sequence of numerous kings, often of non-royal birth. They continued to rule from Ijtawi on paper, but real power splintered among provincial governors and local warlords. The weak 13th dynasty could not maintain authority in the Delta, allowing a new crop of local rulers to rise. Their Semitic names, such as Ya'amu and Ya'aqob-Ha, point to Levantine, either Canaanite or Amorite roots. They could have been a loose line of Asiatic merchant princes who migrated and set up trading colonies in the Nile Delta. This 14th dynasty was more of a commercial power than imperialist, and were able to coexist with the native Egyptian 13th dynasty, who maintained control of Upper Egypt. No longer was the land unified, and Egypt was cut off from its trading ties to the Levant. But still, stability remained. That is, until the arrival of another. By around 1650 BCE, Lower Egypt, the Delta, came under the control of a new dynasty. These rulers, the Hyksos, were descended from Semitic Canaanites of the Levant. They would go on to form yet another dynasty, the 15th, which absorbed the smaller Canaanite 14th dynasty. The arrival of the Hyksos caused the native Egyptian rulers of the 13th dynasty to retreat to the south and set up a capital back at Thebes in Upper Egypt. There they would fizzle out as a rump 16th and 17th dynasty of native Egyptian princes held on. The carefully maintained system that had kept Egypt strong devolved, as Egypt was shattered into a second intermediate period. As the second intermediate period dawned, the rivalry between Egypt and Kush remained unresolved. The former Egyptian southern border at Semna was forgotten, as Lower Nubia was lost, and the effective boundary was pushed once again to Elephantine. Both kingdoms, through alternating cooperation and conflict, shaped the destiny of the Nile Valley in the 2nd millennium BCE, leaving a story written in stone, mud brick, and the very bones of their people. For 4 centuries, the Middle Kingdom brought order to the two lands. But even the strongest walls crack. As dynasties fade and foreign rulers rise in the Delta, Egypt stands once more on the brink. The next chapter, the Hyksos sweep in from the Delta, and Nubia's rising kings of Kush watch from the desert's edge. The die is cast. It's the war for Egypt's soul.